Well, good morning and welcome to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. Just checking to make sure that the video looks good, and it does, and thank you for the messages. Sounds good. We're ready to go. We're broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning, and we have a lot to get to this morning. I have, again, blocked off this whole program just so we could play catch up because there is so much to talk about. But as always, we thank M.A. Neal Financial Services for the M.A. Neal Financial Services section of the program. And we have a guest, and we will have guests tomorrow and throughout the week. But there's just been so many big news stories. I do want to start local, and then we're going to get to a little bit more about Bob Menendez, as we talked about yesterday. But before that, I received a press release from our friend Congressman Nick Langworthy that I wanted to highlight to you before we get into some of the national scene. Here we go. Let me get this up on screen. A statement, because Congressman Nick Langworthy announced 2 federal grants from the Appalachian Regional Commission for the Southern Tier Central Regional Planning and Development Board, totaling $100,000. And this is what the congressman had to say. I'm proud to announce 2 grants for the development of the Southern Tier through the Appalachian Regional Commission. This investment will provide new opportunities for growth, job creation, and sustainable development, securing the financial future of our region. I look forward to my continued partnership with the Southern Tier Central Regional Planning and Development Board, it's a mouthful, to make our community a better place to work and live. The Southern Tier Central Regional Planning and Development Board will receive a grant for $60,000 towards the West Water Street site pre-development work project to enhance the development readiness of a prime industrial site and the prospects for economic growth within the community of Painted Post. We've heard that about that story for quite a while. And the second grant is the amount of $40,000 and will provide Land Use Leadership Alliance training to local leaders from Chemung, Schuyler, and Steuben counties concerning best practices for land use, sustainable development, and implementation of goals to support the Seneca-Keuka Watershed 9-element plan. So I want to bring that to you, and thank you to the congressman for reaching out with that quote. Okay, so we're going to talk about Bob Menendez here in just a little bit. We also have quite a few things about President Biden. And of course, this week is the next GOP primary debate. So there's a lot of talks about that already. I believe it's tomorrow, but I'll have all that information for you a little bit later on. I've been looking at some of the comments, and I know I bring this up a lot, but it seems like the people that don't want to see, and I mean by people, the people in the media that don't want to see a Republican ever win, sure have a lot of opinions on what the candidates need to do to take down Trump. It's always kind of fascinating to me. So we'll talk about that as well, and maybe a few other New York things if we have the opportunity. Before we take our first break, though, I do want to put our contact information up. Feel free to weigh in on all of these issues this morning, or something that maybe I did not bring up, but that you would like to talk about, maybe a big issue that you think we're missing out on. There is all the information. I'm also going to tell you, if we have the opportunity, about a special program we're going to offer here on Big Fox this Saturday for all you wine glass runners, for the residents of our area, or just fans of the wine glass. We're going to have a very special broadcast this weekend to give you all the information you need to know. So if you're new, or when I say new to the area, well, maybe new to the area, but if you're coming into town just for the wine glass, you're not going to want to miss this. All the information you're going to need to know, and then some. So let's take that first break, and then we will be back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. You're watching Frankly Speaking here on Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. Let's talk about Senator Bob Menendez. I'm not going to go on about this too long. We talked about it quite a bit yesterday. He did not necessarily announce that he's running for re-election yesterday, but he did give a press conference. And it didn't signal that he's not going to not run. But as the New York Post put it, he played the Cuba card and says that piles of cash that the feds found were actually from his savings. He said, for 30 years, I have withdrawn thousands of dollars in cash from my personal savings, which I have kept for emergencies, and because of the history of my family facing confiscation in Cuba. Now, this may seem old-fashioned, But these were monies drawn from my personal savings account based on the income that I've lawfully derived over those 30 years. I don't know if that explains the gold bars necessarily, does it? I guess maybe you could keep gold bars in your savings. I don't have that kind of savings. He did leave the press conference immediately after he made his remarks, ignoring shouted questions from the media. There are about 50 reporters in the room. Oh, and it even mentions here in the New York Post piece, he did not explain how more than $100,000 worth of gold bars came to be in his home in addition to the cash. And I don't know if I mentioned this yesterday, but if convicted on the counts, he faces up to 45 years in prison. So it's made for some interesting, well, maybe awkward conversations with some politicians when they ask, do you believe that he should resign? AOC making it sound like he should resign. I think Fetterman did as well. Pelosi as well. Nancy Pelosi's been going a little rogue lately, whether it's her lackluster response to Harris or normally, I'm just saying, normally she'd be better at rallying around the troops. In this situation, she said, I respect their position they are taking, meaning the people that have called on Senator Menendez to resign. And the charges are formidable. If, in fact, we are going to say that if you're indicted, you should resign, we have a situation in the House, as you know, from the state of New York, that would hold to, and she's referring to, I believe, George Santos. But right now, sadly, because of the challenges that we face, because of skepticism that exists in our country about governance, about this Republican Party that does not believe in governance, doesn't believe in science. Wow. So they want to take down everything in order to give tax breaks to the wealthiest. We've got to stay focused on that. And for that reason, it probably would be a good idea if he did resign. Think about if you're a career politician, how things like that must be muscle memory or knee-jerk. Imagine being asked, hey, you got a senator in your party that is now indicted on bribery. You think he should resign. And you make sure to hit the talking points. The Republican Party does not believe in governance. And I think she missed a mark on that a little bit because what they're trying to, I guess the talking point that sounds like a broken record at this point that Biden's pushing is that the Republicans are a threat to democracy. So I think that's what she was going for there. But Republican Party does not believe in governance, doesn't believe in science. So they want to take down everything in order to give tax breaks to the wealthiest. It's almost like she hit the hat trick. She got the three biggest talking points almost perfect in response to if a senator from her party should resign. Politics is fascinating, isn't it? Must be a weird lifestyle. You almost feel like she could probably say that in her sleep, that sentence. But to mention her point about Santos, and I can't run too late, but she was saying, I assume there, not to put words in her mouth, but I think she was saying that Santos should resign. But did you see that this Menendez indictment actually finds Chuck Schumer and George Santos aligned with the same mindset? This is coming from cityandstatenewyork.com. Chuck Schumer saying in a statement, Bob Menendez has been a dedicated public servant and is always fighting hard for the people of New Jersey. He has a right to due process and a fair trial. Senator Menendez has rightly decided to step down temporarily from his position as chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee until this matter has been resolved. And this is what I mean about rallying around the troops. This is what you would have normally seen. That's what interests me about Pelosi and maybe an AOC and a Fetterman coming out and calling for him to resign. Not typical, at least if you look at past history. But there must be an end game there because they're probably thinking, could these words be used against me with Trump or, whatever the case may be. So George Santos was asked as he was walking, I assume, out of the halls of Congress. And if you're not aware, Santos is under federal criminal indictment as well. He told MSNBC at first he did not have an opinion. And then according to this reporter, changed his mind in a nanosecond, saying, quote, I think due process is important, and I think he has the right to defend himself. He's innocent until proven guilty. The media has to stop acting like everybody is guilty before they are judged by juries. When did we walk away from the fabric of our Constitution that everybody has a presumption of innocence before anything else? I don't think he should resign. So Santos and Schumer on the same page. Couple of little small bits on this, and then we're going to move along. But first, I have to take a break. So stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. Thank you again for joining us here on Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV. Big Fox, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. We're talking about Senator Bob Menendez. Dan McLaughlin at the New York Post says, of course, Menendez won't resign. Corrupt politicians today are shameless. Well, I would argue that corrupt politicians have always been somewhat shameless, right? Isn't that by definition? But I think it's a good point. Not only will he not resign, he most likely will run for re-election. Now, whether or not he wins, but this is what McLaughlin says. Menendez is running for re-election. Of course he is. Doesn't anybody have any shame anymore? 30 years ago, Washington, D.C. was a national laughingstock for re-electing Marion Barry. You remember Mayor Marion Barry? After he was caught on video smoking crack cocaine with a woman that was not his wife. According, again, to Dan McLaughlin at the New York Post, Barry would fit right in today. Almost nobody quits in disgrace anymore, even when caught totally red-handed. The rare ones who do, like Andrew Cuomo, though, interesting, because, it was never about the nursing homes. It was all about... Anyway, go only when pushed and forced out, and then immediately resurface, totally unrepentant and looking for a new angle. Yeah, look at Spitzer. He was going to run for... Did he end up running for comptroller? And Anthony Weiner was going to run again. That's a good point. Maybe that's a New York thing. George Santos hasn't quit yet and says he's running again as well. And if you look at it, it took 25 years to get rid of the Clintons. So he ties this back in with Senator Menendez saying, hilariously, the son of Cuban refugees claims that he was in the habit of hoarding cash in his house, but specifically in the liners of his jackets, due to his family's history of facing confiscation by communist governments. And Republicans thought they had a dim view of what New Jersey is like under Phil Murphy. But why would, this is the question, and I'll ask this to you to ponder. Why would Menendez quit? Nobody's going to make him go. And experience has taught him that brazing it out just might work. Yeah, and that's kind of the thought. Why? Obviously, you would say because of morals or, taking the high road. Obviously, we know why he should, but why would he? That's why I'm a little surprised that Nancy Pelosi and others didn't rally around him, because normally he would have been fine. So you'll have to respond to some of that at some point. But if he keeps, playing through this, it just might work. He might still be there. It might be all forgotten. He may win re-election. So I thought that was an interesting point from Dan McLaughlin overall, that where is this kind of, I guess, morality, for lack of a better word, when no one resigns unless forced to. And even then, I point to Cuomo, Spitzer, Anthony Weiner. They may be forced to resign, but they're still always looking for a way to come back in one capacity or another. Now, Bob Menendez, and kind of, I don't know if you'd say it's irony, just weird how major stories are aligning. Bob Menendez has hired Hunter Biden's lawyer for this bribery case. The lawyer, Abe Lawal, he's been hired by Bob Menendez to defend him against federal bribery charges. Lawal, who represents high-profile individuals engulfed in political scandals, represented Menendez in a prior corruption case, if you remember that, back in 2015, that ended in a mistrial. Seems like you would learn from that. But anyway, his former client list has included Senator John Edwards. There's another one. Lobbyist Jack Abramoff, Bill Clinton, and Jared Kushner. So high-profile individuals. Now we know, again, that Menendez has refused to resign from the Senate. So just mentioning that to tie in with Hunter, which is also interesting because we've talked... Oh, I'm doing good on time. Okay, cool. I'm going to settle in. We've talked about Hunter extensively on this program, and we've also talked about, and you may recall this name, Gavin Newsom. He's a name that's being thrown around of potential if Joe Biden doesn't, if he decides at some point that he doesn't want to run for re-election, then maybe Gavin Newsom would be one of the names. Now, if you look at the polls, he's not doing that great, kind of the generic polls, but he has been out what you would most likely consider, if you look at it at face value, campaigning for it. He says that's not what he's doing, but that's what it looks like. Kind of the typical campaign. What we learned from Fox News just this morning, California Governor Gavin Newsom's recent defense of Hunter Biden, you may have seen that in the news, against allegations of nepotism and shady business deals, follows emails from Biden's infamous laptop showing the president's son donated thousands of dollars to Newsom's gubernatorial campaign and lent his name to multiple fundraisers on his behalf. Now, Newsom, who's expected to attend Wednesday's GOP debate on behalf of the Biden campaign, brushed off allegations of Hunter Biden's corrupt business dealings last week, saying it is, quote, hardly unique for people to use their family members to get ahead. Boy, I don't know how I like that defense, but that seems to be kind of a road that certain talking heads have been going down. I mean, Clyburn yesterday said you can't be arrested for loving your son, that type of thing. But anyway, I don't know enough about the details of that. I mean, I've seen a little of that, Newsom said. That was on CNN's Dana Bash show, when asked if Hunter Biden did anything inappropriate leveraging his father's name. Now, the reason I mention this is because there's some back and forth in these emails, which why Hunter Biden ever saved these? And then I know the addiction or whatever, but just leaving it at that computer store, a laptop store. But this is about a 5-6 page article you can find at Fox News. We won't have time to get to all of it. But one of the emails saying, hey, here's my direct email, meaning you can start directly emailing Hunter. Hunter, you can start directly emailing Gavin Newsom. And I find that interesting. If anything more will come from that, because I don't know if you saw the story, and we'll talk about it when we come back from break, but it looks as if DeSantis and Newsom are going to hold that much anticipated debate. So it's interesting to see that story from Fox News, that Newsom does have these longtime ties to Hunter Biden, and on the same, basically the same day, that was today's article, yesterday, that it was announced that there would be this debate. So very much like a political campaign. Very much what story gets released when. But will anything come from that with Newsom's connection? I don't know, because the media, that came from Fox News, but the media overall doesn't want to report on Hunter whatsoever anyway, let alone Gavin Newsom, who many in the media consider to be an up-and-comer, if not the likely candidate either this time or the next go-around. So kind of interesting there, but I'm going to tell you more about that debate when we come back. Please feel free to weigh in at any time. You'll see the number on the bottom of the screen, a text, or leave a voicemail. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. Did you just see that promo that played? Yes, we're having a very special Guthrie Wine Glass Marathon preview right here on Big Fox. And in case you missed it, I want to tell you a little bit more about it. The promo just played. But here, I'll actually put it up on the screen so you have it there, because you're not going to want to miss it. Whether you're in town right now because you're preparing for the wine glass, maybe you're a resident and you've always wondered, okay, what's the path? What can I do to make this as easy on me and the runners as possible? Maybe you're a volunteer, or just a fan of the Wine Glass Marathon being in our community. Well, on those dates, this Saturday, 9:30 a.m. and 10 p.m., and Sunday at 5 a.m. and 6 a.m. Now, why are we doing that? That's obviously so that the runners have an opportunity to catch the broadcast, so that they have all the information they need. We're going to be talking with race director Sheila Sutton. She'll tell us everything we need to know. And then we'll be talking with our friend Sheriff Jim Allard, because he knows the logistics side of it. You're not going to want to miss it, so that's why I put those dates up there. And again, thank you to our friends at Hector Hideaway for bringing us the Guthrie Wine Glass Marathon preview special. All right, back to the news. I mentioned DeSantis, and Governor Newsom have made it official. They are going to have a Fox News debate. This has been going on back and forth, almost like, I don't know if we have any boxing fans out there, where there's a lot of hype, and then it kind of goes away, and then it comes back. And, well, they finally agreed November 30th will be the day. And it's going to be hosted, the debate, hosted by Sean Hannity. And, of course, the debate will be on Fox News, making sense why Hannity was picked. And Newsom had done an interview recently with Hannity, and that's why a lot of the speculation started of what's the end game here? What are you trying to get out of all of this? I guess the political nerd in me is going to find this very, very fascinating. And I do look forward to it. So I've got it marked in my calendar already, November 30th. And I know we brought that up in the past, so that's why, I guess I could put it up on the screen. That's why I want to bring it to you. DeSantis and Newsom officially agree to November 30th Fox News debate. Okay, now let's get into the presidential realm for a moment. And as always, feel free to weigh in. Newsweek has a piece, and I can't put it up on the screen because it was one of those websites that's all ad. But Newsweek says that Joe Biden's nightmare election scenario might be coming true. I'm not going to say that we were way ahead of the curve on this, but we were. We've been talking about the Cornel West and now the Robert F. Kennedy maybe going to the Libertarian Party and what that means for Biden. Because when we see the polls, it's been pretty close. Trump and Biden neck and neck. Then last week we had the poll that showed that Biden's actually down 10 points. Now, ironically, pollsters were coming out and saying this is an outlier, even though it was Washington Post, ABC News. I mean, it was if any poll's legitimate, it was a legitimate poll. But it's interesting, if you don't get the results you like in a poll, it goes to show you maybe a little bit into the mindset of pollsters. If you don't get the results you like, you say it's an outlier. That's the political jargon to use. It's an outlier. It's a nothing burger. But we had mentioned at the time with that poll and other polls in the past that even showed them neck and neck, it normally does not take into account a third party run. Wait till you hear some of these numbers. Now the speculation is growing that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. may run as a libertarian, and I think it may be in here. He said he would make that call on running as an independent before October 15th. So we will know before October 15th. But Democrats worry that a third-party candidate in a general election will pull votes away from Biden, of course. And, I didn't even put in there, and I still think this is a little overhyped, but the no label party, what I mean by overhyped is they say that it could hurt Biden. I'm not really sure that's their goal. But if you want to take their nervousness as fact, then, okay, now you have 3 different people stealing votes from you. In their mind, stealing votes. So Democrats worry that a third-party candidate in a general election will pull votes away from Biden, who is facing low approval ratings, and help elect the eventual Republican nominee in 2024. The same concerns were expressed after Cornel West announced he would run as a Green Party candidate. And now the fears are growing as Biden remains neck and neck with the leading GOP contender, former President Trump, in hypothetical matchups. And that doesn't, again, they're almost completely ignoring that ABC News, Washington Post poll from last week that showed former President Trump up 10 because almost as if they just want to put their head in the sand. Political consultant Jay Townsend told Newsweek, the last thing Biden needs is Robert Kennedy Jr. running on the Libertarian line. Nothing good of that will come from that for Biden. Now, this is why I mention it without going on too long. Listen to this. A poll released last week found that 1/3 of Democrats would vote for Kennedy if he were to run as an independent. 1/3 of Democrats would vote for Kennedy if he were to run as an independent. A boost from the 25% who said they would vote for him in the primaries. So he's actually getting a boost as an independent candidate. 1/3 of Democrats wouldn't vote the party line. They would go independent, whatever, if it's libertarian or whatever direction RFK Jr. decides to go, they would go in that direction. And what his spokesperson said, Kennedy's spokesperson, I think it's a very good point. The fact that President Biden is so unpopular that fully 1/3 of Democrats would vote for an independent candidate in the general election underscores the importance of running a fair and competitive primary election. Yeah, because if you recall, and there's piece after piece about it today, and there will be tomorrow, that trying to goad former President Trump into the debate, saying Why are you scared? Why aren't you debating? See, he doesn't like democracy. Well, there's never been any call for Biden to debate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and or Marianne Williamson, who are primarying him. There's never been any threat to democracy in that. And ignoring that, I don't know if you could say challenge. It just was never mentioned that it wasn't going to happen. It was just accepted at that point. But I think, to Kennedy's spokesperson's point, that it shows the importance of running a fair and competitive primary election when a third of Democrats would go independent to vote for somebody other than Biden. So again, Kennedy said he would make that call before October 15th. So if you've got him, just playing mind games here, if he were to run as a libertarian, then you have Cornel West as Green Party, and then perhaps as no labels. It gets very interesting when we look at polls that are already, at the very least, neck and neck for Biden and the former president. Now, according to the Daily Mail out of the United Kingdom, Hillary Clinton warned Joe Biden, and she cussed, so I got to be careful here, warned Joe Biden in a private meeting that he has to take these third-party candidates seriously, or else it could prove disastrous. Now, this is something that I think, Clinton has been looking to blame anybody but herself about her loss to Trump for years now, still continues to do so. So they've always overhyped, in my opinion, the Jill Stein factor, which she was the third party, the Green Party candidate, if you recall at the time. She may have taken some votes, but nothing of significance. But, again, they're looking for someone to blame other than the campaign themselves, because those people that work for the campaign still want to work for other campaigns. That's the dirty little secret of politics. One losing consultant gets hired by the next candidate. And that's one of the big criticisms we had with the Republicans for so long. Former John McCain consultant now hired by Mitt Romney. And you're going, but anyway, sorry. A little bit of a tangent there. Hillary Clinton warned President Joe Biden in a private meeting that he needed to take the threat of a third-party challenger seriously. Now, I don't even know if he's taking his campaign seriously, if I'm being honest, but I can't imagine people behind the scenes are really brushing this off completely when you start to see the numbers add up, whether in that poll showing that Kennedy would get a third of Democrat votes, or just the fact that you now have two quote-unquote viable candidates, someone with a Kennedy last name and Cornel West, who has been really a star in the Democrat Party for so long, a regular talking head on numerous news magazine programs. Clinton saw her own White House dreams dashed when she lost the 2016 election to Donald Trump. And here we go. With a number of Clinton allies labeling Green Party nominee Jill Stein a spoiler. Again, it's just like when she started blaming Russia or whatever. It's listen, it never feels good to lose. So she's making excuses. I don't think Jill Stein pulled that kind of weight. But again, if you believe that, if you accept that, that's the same party that Cornel West will be running on. She said it's pretty blanking concerning, she told Joe Biden. Now, Biden faces potential spoilers from both his political left and right, with Cornel West, a former supporter of Bernie Sanders, coming after votes from Biden's left, and the group No Labels, so they don't even really mention. This article must have been put out before this talk with RFK going to Libertarian. And No Labels hoping to get a moderate on the general election ballot. Again, I don't buy that premise that that's going to take away that many votes from Biden, but still, that's three threats to the Biden campaign. All right, we're going to talk a little bit more about this when we come back, but I do have to take a break. Weigh in on this topic or any other topic we discussed this morning here on Frankly Speaking. And thank you for being a part of the program. I really do appreciate it. We'll be right back after this. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. We are running a little bit late. I was wrong. There we go. Okay. And I saw that we went blank there for a second. Okay, but we do have a chance to bring this up. Rich Lowry, just to tie into what we've been saying, you've got the third party scare with Biden. Rich Lowry says in this piece at the New York Post that Kamala Harris is the worst VP pick in 50 years, but somehow it helps a weak Joe Biden. Poor Harris. The alleged misogyny that is tearing at her vice presidency apparently extends to highly partisan Democrat leaders such as Jamie Raskin and Nancy Pelosi, both who were not really in any way, shape, or form in her defense for staying on the ticket. Both caused ripples when their praise for Harris in recent TV interviews was notably cool, as if they were at a high-end fundraising dinner and hated the escargot, but had to try to convince the hostess they really loved it. That is, I mean, that's a little overhyped, but it was. Pelosi specifically was very awkward. Well, I guess Biden thinks she's the best, one of those kind of answers. What Raskins and Pelosi clearly know, even if they can't say it out loud, is Joe Biden botched his vice presidential pick. It is the worst pick in half a century, and easily one of the worst in the last 80 years. As Democrats begin to realize Biden's political weakness, with Donald Trump barreling down, Harris is one of the factors, although not the main one, keeping them from doing anything about it. And I know Lowry's not new to the party on this because we talked about it extensively as well, that that's really why, and many people believe that Biden hasn't declared he wouldn't run for re-election, because then it would almost have to be Harris. And that's not a successful ticket, no matter who she puts on as VP. That's why some people in the Democrat Party were saying, why doesn't Newsom give Harris Feinstein's seat, if Feinstein were to step down, and then that would take her off the ticket. We can get somebody new and maybe energize Biden, or just a new candidate in general. What if someone did persuade Biden to step aside for the good of the party, says Lowry? Well, that might open the way for Harris herself to become the nominee. In other words, out of the pan and into the fire. Even if she lost in an open nominating process, it'd be quite the spectacle for Democrats to turn away a potentially, quote, historic presidential nominee for someone else. So she's at least playing a role in the propping up of what may prove the weakest incumbent president candidate since George H.W. Bush. This isn't the only downside, says Rich Lowry. Harris is going to be an issue next year because everyone realizes there's a significant chance Biden wouldn't be able to serve out his full second term. And that's what many people have been talking about, that especially as we near November, if that is the ticket, many people, especially the nominee, whoever that may be, will be very solid on bringing up the fact that it could ultimately end up being Harris as president. And Harris is not popular, not amongst Democrats, obviously not amongst Republicans. So it will be a good and effective talking point. Lowry goes through some of the history here, and he says, I think to find a worse major party pick than Harris and an actual vice president, you'd have to go back to Spiro Agnew. At least as far as we know, Harris hasn't been taking kickbacks that will force her to resign. In fact, she may be the relatively ethical half of the Biden-Harris ticket, he says. But just to wrap this up before we go to break, wherever you rank Kamala Harris, there's no doubt she's a poor selection that Democrats will almost certainly have to tolerate because of an ideological trap of their own making. Yes, an ideological trap that they set for themselves. All right, we've got to take a short break. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. We are coming up on another short break, a couple of them, because we're having fun this morning and we're covering so many things. I did see, it's kind of funny. Joe Biden fumbled an acronym during the Pacific Island Forum speech. He botched a simple acronym while speaking to leaders from the Pacific Island Monday. He got stumped as he was trying to dictate the abbreviation of his administration's Pacific Island Infrastructure Initiative at a White House forum. And he said, today I'm pleased to announce we're working with Congress to invest $40 billion in our Pacific Island Infrastructure Initiative. We call it the PI. Anyways, doesn't matter what we call it, but that's what it is. You know what? Out of all the fumbles, this one doesn't mean quite as much to me. I was going to get back to acronyms. I'm going to withstand not doing that, he said, as some laughed, but I know some see it as a larger picture. Did you see that a top shale CEO, before we go to break, and this is also more bad news for the Biden administration. Doug Lawler, chief executive of Continental Resources, the shale drilling giant, said on Monday that crude prices are set to remain elevated and could actually press to the $120 to $150 a barrel range without new production. So more price pressure is coming, he said, unless policies are put into place to encourage more output. Well, we won't see that from this administration unless it gets very bad, and even then, I don't think they would. But it's going to shock the whole system. It's going to send a shock through the system. All right, let's take another short break because we've got a couple things on the Republican side of the presidential race, and then we have a quick thing about New York. Can't believe we're already wrapping things up. The show does go very, very fast. So stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. So this isn't... Well, these people may be good at doing polls. I'm not sure. This is St. Anselm College. But they're not good at headlines. It's not what you would call an effective headline. But it is true. It's all accurate. You don't even have to read the article. But new poll by St. Anselm College Survey Center shows Nikki Haley surging ahead of Ron DeSantis as Trump maintains his front-runner status. And this is in New Hampshire specifically. You know my thoughts. I like Nikki Haley. Don't get me wrong. This is not a dig at Nikki Haley. I just always am curious when the coverage really switches towards one person, specifically the coverage from media outlets that are not friendly to Republicans, that never want to see Republicans win. But this new poll conducted, it shows that Trump's still leading his closest challengers by a 3-1 margin among New Hampshire Republican presidential primary likely voters. 45% of respondents preference Trump, which is a 30-point lead over his closest challenger, Nikki Haley. But of course, this signals bigger issues with the problems that DeSantis' campaign is facing, though I would have to think that that debate between him and Gavin Newsom would help maybe re-energize if it goes well, but that's not until November 30th, and many have called for DeSantis to suspend the campaign already. And I know the fundraisers, and I'm not, this is not to pile on DeSantis, I'm telling you what the news has been saying in various outlets, conservative and more liberal, that the donors aren't there any longer. They never gained the traction that people were hoping for. But to piggyback off that, that's why all the articles about the debate on Wednesday have been saying these guys really have to make moves. Any single one of them. Nikki Haley's doing a little bit better, but Nikki Haley, you're still talking, what did I say, 30-point lead? Trump still has a 30-point lead. So when you see them try to have this horse race article, the headlines might get your attention, but when you look at the numbers, you're still talking a 30-point lead. So many times they were arguing the difference between single-digit candidates and what their campaign needed to do to get to third. Well, third is, you get it. You get it. So the debate is on Wednesday. 7 candidates have qualified for the second GOP primary debate. It's going to be held at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. Now, I just saw a piece, and I don't know if this is going to be at the same time, but I know that former President Trump is giving a speech to union workers. So I'm not sure if he's scheduled that at the same time to take some momentum away. But I don't know what outlet would show that either. But I'll continue. These are the candidates before we go to break, and we'll talk more about it. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Ramaswamy, who's still getting a lot of talk out there. Vivek Ramaswamy, right? Former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, former Vice President Mike Pence, Senator Tim Scott, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, and North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum will meet. All met, I should say, the RNC criteria for the debate. I'm going to tell you more about that so you can write it down. Grab your calendar so you will be prepared to watch that on Wednesday. But let me take my last break, and we'll wrap things up here on Frankly Speaking. Stay with us. We'll be right back. And we are back with Frankly Speaking, just wrapping things up on today's edition. Thank you to all the comments that I received. We got kind of caught up on some of the news, and I was looking at them. We don't have a chance to mention all of them. I did see a couple of good ones. I do agree with the viewer that wrote, come on, polls. The polls are a very easy way, no matter how, for the media to manipulate us, whether it's about bail reform like we've talked about, whether it's about the candidate that they prefer. Also, Biden can't replace Kamala Harris, says one viewer, without causing worse damage unless he can get Michelle Obama to run with him. Then Joe would step down after the election, installing the Obamas back in power. Interesting. I know Michelle's name has been thrown around quite a bit. Yes, I don't do polls. Yes, I get it. All right. Thank you. Okay, we are just about out of time. Let me just give you this information. The 2-hour debate will air live starting at 9 p.m. This is the GOP presidential primary debate on Fox Business and Univision, according to the RNC, and it will be carried on live stream by Rumble. Fox News host Stuart Varney and Dana Perino will moderate, along with Univision's Leah Caldrone. So there you are. So that's Wednesday, so be prepared. We'll be talking about a lot on Thursday. One thing I didn't get a chance to mention, New York issue. You perhaps have seen this by now, but I meant to open the show with it. Governor Hochul has deployed the National Guard to assist with New York's migrant crisis. Hochul announced that she'll deploy additional National Guardsmen to help manage the migrant crisis overwhelming New York City and much of the surrounding areas. An additional 150 National Guardsmen will be mobilized to help process the massive number of migrants entering the state each week, bringing the total number of Guardsmen assigned to work on New York's migrant crisis to 2,200. Now, there's two pieces that kind of go along with this, but we're not going to have time to mention it. One from the New York Post. Joe Biden has done nothing to solve the border crisis, despite the White House claims, the crazy White House claims is the way they word it there, because remember, the press secretary saying something to the extent of, we're doing everything we can and it's the Republicans' fault. And then Andrew Arthur also has a piece at the New York Post. Biden lies that he's doing all he can at the border while doing nothing. So that ties in with what we're dealing with us as a state here in New York. Obviously, a lot of the focus is on New York City, as normally the case. But don't think for a moment it hasn't affected us or will affect us even more in the future. That is it for today's edition of Frankly Speaking. Thank you to everybody who joined us. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate you taking out this hour of your time to spend with me. As always, you can reach me after the program at that number on the bottom of the screen. Just leave a voicemail, leave a text. And thank you to everybody who reached out today. I did get a little carried away looking at all the stories, and I didn't play as good catch up. But I did read right before we went on the air, so I appreciate everybody's comments on the issues. Maybe we'll get a chance to mention some of them tomorrow. But that is it for today's edition of Frankly Speaking. Please join us tomorrow morning starting at 7 for Frankly Speaking, only on WYDC TV. Big Fox, I look forward to it already.